So here's what the joint looks like in the end. You can see that it's not quite perfect. There's still a little bit of a gap up here, and then over here on the mortise there was a little bit of a misfit, but frankly most of that just comes from my own inexperience and newness to woodworking. The better you get at cutting these, the more precise you're going to be and the tighter all your joints will fit. However, if you're looking to make this a structural joint, this is going to be more than you need for any of your projects. This is exactly what I used on my workbench all the way around, and it seems to be working just fine. The last step that we're going to do on this is to go ahead and put a wedge in here so that it will go ahead and drive it tight. And by doing that, you may not even need to glue this. But if you're going to be putting this together and you glue it, there's literally nothing you're going to be able to do to take this apart. So the last step of this project is to go ahead and get a wedge, and you can see one of the marks that I already put on there. What I want to do is try and drive this about to where it's going to sit, and then go ahead and mark it on both sides, because I'm going to use that when I take this back out as my mark for where I need to be putting the, essentially it's another mortise that you're going to be putting on the inside of this. The nice thing about this part is that it doesn't have to be precise because we're literally just going to be putting a piece of wood through it. So I am just marking off roughly where I want this to be, and I put these underneath to support it so that I didn't put extra stress on my tenon. But I'm just going to go through and chop this mortise. The other thing that these provide is protection to my workbench. So with that wedge mortise cut, I need to go ahead and get a wedge that will fit through here and drive this even tighter. So I'm going to go ahead and measure what the gap is here, and then make sure I've got a wedge that can go slightly wider than that. So in making this wedge, I made sure that this edge was just under the width of this side after planing it down, and that this one was about 1/8 of an inch larger so that it will drive it through. That may still actually be too steep of an angle on here to close up all the gaps on the other side. We'll see what it looks like when we come through. But as you can see, when you put this in, it sits nice and tightly right there, and then on the bottom side, you can see that it pops through. So I am going to go ahead and start driving this through to get this nice and tight. And then to finish it off, what I would do is I would cut it here. I'm going to leave this whole because I'm not looking to finish this, but you would cut it off at both sides so that you get a good cosmetic face. But given, as we've already talked about this previously, none of my faces are really all that cosmetic because my tolerances weren't all that good. So more practice, better tolerances, better cosmetics. And there she is, a wedged mortise and tenon. This drove in far easier than I was expecting to. I was expecting 1/8 of an inch of expansion up here at the top to go way more, to be way more difficult to drive in. And given that we only went about halfway through, I only drove about 1/16 of a millimeter, but you could actually see it sucking the whole thing out in there. And so I wanted to stop before I did any damage because I actually don't really know what the failure mode would be if we drove this guy in too far. But one of the other cool things is on this side over here, it totally sucked this in a lot tighter. It was, you remember the gap that we had on there a little bit earlier? It is much tighter now and much, see if I can get my autofocus, there it is. a lot nicer now. So this is what it would look like. The last thing that you would want to do is go ahead and trim this up and get all the get it looking nice and pretty. And then this is going to stay solid. I don't even think you would need any glue on this joint. This would be everything that you would need. Hey guys, thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate it. I wanted to take a moment to wish you guys a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. This is one of those things that, I mean, by definition only comes around once a year, but Christmas time and the holidays from like Thanksgiving to New Year's is some of my absolute favorite times of the year. And I hope that all of you got a chance to spend time with your family, with your loved ones, with your friends, or if you're all on your own, just doing something that you enjoy and really had a good holiday season. So this next week is something that's really fun for me as I get some downtime, get to relax from work and get to kind of recharge and rest up and get ready for what comes this next year. So this time through, I'm not going to do a whole bunch of lesson learns, but more just kind of commenting on the process all the way through so that you guys can get comments on some of the things that you may have seen throughout this episode. So the first thing is that the tenon itself had kind of a rough finish, and I'll show you what that looks like. So I don't know if you can see this very well. There's the autofocus. So if you look at the actual surface finish on this guy, it's not as smooth as it could be. This side turned out a little bit better, but you can still see some of the issues associated with it or the rough finish associated with it. And a good chunk of that comes from the fact that I didn't really finish off the tenon in a cosmetic friendly way. I went through with the poor man's router and really just cranked through it. And then I also, with my rebate plane, just kind of cranked through it as well. If you really want to get a good cosmetic finish on there, you got to go through the block plane and go gently, go with the grain, and really take your time to make it look nice. And then on any of the cosmetic face that's going to be sticking out on the outside, I would recommend sanding it. I haven't personally tried that, so I'm not quite sure how it would turn out, but go ahead and sand it and do the same type of finishing techniques you'd use on the rest of it. Just be wary of how much you are taking it down for cosmetics on the piece that's going to be interfacing with the rest of it. Granted, if you're doing a wedge, there's a little bit less need for a good cosmetic fit all the way through. The second thing that I wanted to comment on is that given where I am in my woodworking career at this point, I usually opt for a tight fit on my mortise and tenon joints where I specifically undercut on all of my marks so that everything's fat when it goes together. And earlier on, I was pounding things together, and you really, on a good mortise and tenon joint, shouldn't need to pound everything together. You should get to the point where you can now see in the video where you just kind of push everything together and it kind of comes, and it's only the last little bit that maybe takes a little bit of work to get it in there. But right now I'm opting for a tight fit because I can always remove more material, but I can't add any material. And if you know a way to add more material, let me know, because there's an interesting business opportunities there. But I usually opt for a fat fit and then slowly pare it down. It just takes some time and takes some playing with to get it right. The third thing that I learned, and this kind of came through when I was looking more online at through mortise and tenon joints, is that apparently through mortise and tenon joints are actually pretty difficult to get cosmetically nice, and that's because you will likely get gaps on the far side of your mortise and tenon unless it is really perfect. So it makes me feel a little bit better that cosmetically I'm not quite where I want to be. Just because it's seeing that it is actually a pretty difficult thing to do. So if you're not getting cosmetic joints the way that you expect on a through mortise and tenon, don't feel discouraged. From everything that I'm seeing, it is a pretty difficult thing to do. So I'm going to keep working on getting my tolerances better, but it is a pretty difficult thing to do. The fourth thing that I learned, this is one that just keeps on re-emphasizing itself over and over again in my projects. Having dimensional lumber is absolutely critical. If you're laying it out and you don't have perfectly parallel and square sides, your layout lines go all over the place, which doesn't even allow you to start in the right position. There's a certain amount of execution to keeping things nice, but if you're not even starting from a good place where you've got good dimensional lumber, you're never going to end up quite in the right place, and you're always going to be finagling with it. And on this one, I think you can see it on the actual 4x4 itself. You can see where I didn't plane it and then did plane it, but the problem that caused is this entire face slopes down. So this is just an exaggerated view. It comes down like this, which caused me to march off my mark by about 1/8 of an inch once I got all the way around marking those corners for my mortise. So that's one of the issues that I found when you don't actually go through, when I was just too lazy to truly go through and make the whole thing dimensional. So before you start any of your projects, I highly recommend that you get everything really nice, really square, really good and dimensional, because if your layout lines are wrong, the rest of it's going to be wrong. And then the last one, I didn't even think about this until I got to the end. The wedge that I used was almost identical to the dimensions of a 1x2 that I already had on hand. And when I looked at it, because I used a 1-inch chisel, it was 1 inch true, and a 1x2 is really 3/4 of an inch wide. And what I should have done is just used my 3/4 of an inch chisel to create a wedge that could just use a 1x2 that was already there, and then I can just slice it down or rip it down, or even just make the wedge just a hair under the 1 inch, and so then we could work it out to the 1 inch mark. So if I was really thinking ahead, I would have done something like that. That was something that just hadn't really crossed my mind at the end. But if you're going to go ahead and do this project, I would highly recommend you look at what stock you have on hand and make your wedge appropriately sized so that you don't have to do the double cut that I did to make my wedge and pull it out of a 2x4 or out of a larger piece of lumber. All right, thank you guys for joining. I really appreciate it. I know that I say that a lot, but I really do appreciate you guys being on the channel. I have so much fun with you guys, and I have so much fun providing this content for you. This has been a huge learning process for me over this first year of doing both YouTube and of doing just woodworking as a whole. So I really appreciate you guys being here. I really appreciate you as a part of the community, and I can't wait for what's coming up this next year. If you have any questions, as always, leave them down in the comments and I'll go ahead and get back to you. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you like the content that we're providing here on Northwest Craftsman, we would absolutely love it if you subscribe and hit the bell notification. It looks like YouTube actually changed its policies so that you don't get notified just by being subscribed. You actually have to hit the bell icon in order to get a notification that an episode was released. So go ahead and hit that bell icon if you want to be notified when new episodes are released. And I will see you guys in about a week. I've got one more video that's coming out for this year, which I guess technically is going to be at the hair of a beginning of next year. And then I'm going to go through and we'll talk through some of the plans that we have for this upcoming year. So thank you guys for joining. I really appreciate it. Go find us on Facebook. Go find us on Instagram. And I'll see you guys next time. All right, have a great one and enjoy the rest of your holiday season.